What is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York calling from the quarantine zone again, and this time we got the Gray Days interview part two. We are here with Sean. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's awesome to have you here. We're getting this new EP, the Amends sort of stripped EP, an acoustic album. One thing I was curious about was this always like an intention that you guys had? Was there this an original idea to kind of make an acoustic version of these songs, or was it more or less kind of like an idea that you and Kristen and everybody kind of like thought of under quarantine and all this time?
No, I wish it was my idea. It was actually Tom Wally's idea. When we were recording the original Amends full length, he brought to our attention, he said, look, we have these retail partners like Target and Walmart, and specifically for the Japanese release, we need to have one additional track that makes their packaging and their physical copy special and unique to their retail experience and their customer base. So that made sense. So I showed him some of these acoustic songs we had in the past, and he said, yeah, those are great, redo those. So he put us back in the studio with Billy Bush after we had recorded the Amends album, so that we could do three tracks, one for Japan, one for Target, one for Walmart. And we ended up doing Sometimes, Soul Song, and What's in the Eye. And then once we did those and put them out, he said, these are really great. We should do a full length. Actually, his son, Ryan Wally, said we should do the whole album stripped like this. And I said, well, we don't have all of those songs in an acoustic format. We don't have different versions of those, but we do have enough for maybe 5 or 6 tracks. And they said, well, then let's do an EP. So to Tom and Ryan's credit, they're the ones that pushed us to go back in. And then we ended up doing Shouting Out with producer S.J. Jones and Billy Bush. And then we decided to use a really unique track that we had. It was us just in a room back in 1997 of Mace, Chester, myself, and our original guitar player, Bobby Benish. When we were recording that album, No Sun Today, I had just started playing on the piano, and we just ran through a couple of cycles of a song called The Syndrome acoustically, and we just put it down on 2-track. We don't have multi-tracks of it. It's just literally us with a couple of microphones in a room. And we decided to keep that version on the Amends stripped album because it's just a really unique performance. And it's imperfect. There's some tuning things, and Chester doesn't sound like he's, through a bunch of processing or anything like that, but it's just it's really cool, really special performance that we decided to include.
Yeah, well, that's what I've always loved about acoustic albums, because I feel like it's one of those albums where you are like pretty much naked, like there's nothing to hide on it, and there's like nothing to really shadow on
Yeah.
it. You can't hide behind the smoke screen of distortion, as I said. But like, do you feel that by making like acoustic versions of these songs, this maybe like either enhances or maybe even changes the context of how the songs were originally were? Do you feel like that maybe it gives off a different vibe?
There is definitely a different context because they were, we had these different versions originally. So they're done in different tempos, or Chester uses different lyrics in different parts. Like there's a really cool bridge in Sometimes that's different than the rock version. The way we did it in Syndrome, there's a whole different solo version that was different than the original in context. So I think you're clearly going to get a different dynamic when you listen to it this way. And you're going to hear little nuances of what Chester's doing that aren't in the rock versions that I think just makes it that much more special.
Hmm. Now, I kind of want to turn back the clock a little bit, back to 1997, back when I was 4 years old, pre-hybrid theory days. But like, what was the original idea of Gray Days when you and Chester were like in a room together, and kind of like, was there like an idea, like the way that we hear Amends now, when we hear Sickness and In Time and The Syndrome, is this how they were always like originally made? Was this like always the goal for Gray Days in a way?
So you asked a few questions in there, and I'll try to attack them one at a time. Our original intention was just to play and have fun. As we started writing together, we realized we had something special and that we wanted to be rock stars and make it a full-time thing. We started chasing that dream. We idolized different groups at the time. You had bands at the top of the list. You had Alice in Chains and Depeche Mode and Nirvana and Pearl Jam. And for Chester, you had Stone Temple Pilots and Jane's Addiction. So those were bands we kind of idolized, and I don't want to say emulated because I don't think we sound like any of those bands, but those were really our influences, the ingredients of what made Grey Daze. You know, those influences went into our writing and our approach to music. So initially, the idea of Grey Daze was we were a grunge rock band, kind of post grunge, coming out of that scene. The new versions of what we're doing, I would say, more modern grunge. We've adapted these songs and rewritten these songs into a more modern, relevant, musically relevant band for 2020. You know, the music sounds, and I get this comment a lot, it sounds like you just recorded this last week with him. And that was the intention of the new album, the new music that we're putting with these older tracks, is to make sure that they do sound relevant in today's era, but it still keeps the initial post grunge intent and intensity.
Yeah. Well, I remember reviewing the album last year. First off, I wanted to thank you for having the album come out last year, because in a time when, all the distress was really beginning to settle in, we needed, the voice of Chester, and this music I thought was really resonating with what we needed. It was like the perfect timing to cater to what we needed emotionally. But I love the instrumentation behind it as well. Like, I love what you were kind of like able to achieve in it. Like, how was there, like, did you have to like play, were you kind of like playing to like adjust to Chester's voice in a way, or did you have like the music written down and Chester would sing over it later?
No, when we started the project, Chester was still alive and we were working on it together. So our initial intention was to go in and just redo the songs we had pretty much in their original format. And then as time went on, we started realizing they sounded a little dated and that we wanted to modernize them. And then Chester passed away. So once Chester passed away, the project was put on hold. And when we picked it back up again, we stripped everything away from him and just left his vocals there and started with the vocals, and then we literally rewrote the music around his vocals. So the entire intention of the new music was written around his vocals in a modern format.
Hmm. Is there maybe older formats like laid around somewhere in a way, or
Oh yeah.
like
Yeah, there's two full records of it done that way, and they'll probably be released after we're done doing everything with the reversions, the revisions of the music. We'll probably put everything out in maybe a box set or something somewhere down the line where you can hear the old way and the new way collectively. But I feel like, in those original formats, those albums really weren't produced. They weren't really layered properly. Because we were paying for it ourselves at local studios. We didn't have labels and producers helping us do it the proper way. Yet we still had something very special. And that's why I think the band was so successful at the time, and had the label interest, and had the large following and such.
Yeah, I feel like, people like to hear like the raw demos and like the original stuff, because people like that like underground innocence, if you will. Like, think about like Nirvana's Bleach and how much of a cult following that album has, you know what I mean? Like, people love hearing an artist when they're like in their innocent days, you know what I mean? The underground innocence, I like to call it.
Yeah, as long as the writing is there. So sometimes you have bands, in our early stuff, there's stuff I would never want to see the light of day, and I'm sure Chester would agree with me on that. But once we started to come into our own, so to speak, and understand at a more mature writing level, as musicians, then even though those didn't make ultra fame like Linkin Park stuff did, there's still some magic in those songs, and those are the ones that we are wanting to see the light of day.
Yep. Looking back, when you see on just how great Amends was now, and we're getting another taste of it now with this acoustic, like, what have you learned so much about yourself as an artist? Do you think that maybe exploring this material is going to maybe allow you to pursue other endeavors in the future and collaborate with more musicians?
I'm open to it, but that's not the goal. The goal for me on this was, and for Mason, for Kristen, was to just honor our friend. This was important to him before he passed away. This was something that was a pet passion project for Chester, and I think we just wanted to finish it and make sure that his fans finally got a chance to listen to the music. I don't think this would have happened if Warner Brothers back in the day, 2000, 2001, hadn't stepped all over the Grey Daze legacy and basically shelved it in a way where you could not find our music for years because they took all of our CDs off the shelves. They took all of our music off of iTunes and just basically erased our history, which eventually Chester came to resent. I resented it from the moment it happened, but I think he viewed it as, well, it's kind of minor league stuff. Let's not worry about it. As he was more intent on making sure he saw through the dream of the Linkin Park band, which I understand 100%. But I think as time went on, Chester realized he was manipulated a little bit by the label into suppressing his earlier works, which was not cool, and which is one of the reasons he came around to wanting to revisit the band and put it back together and let those songs see the light of day. I've got text messages and emails going back and forth with Chester saying, I'm not going to let this happen again. We'll make sure that these songs get out there in the right way, which that's really the intention of why we completed the project. Had none of that stuff happen, I don't think we'd be doing what we did.
Yeah, and we all always learn about ourselves in the future, and we all go through many different experiences in life, and it's cool that we get to get a modern taste of this material now. You know what I mean? And because
Thank you.
there's I think we're hearing this material in its best form. I mean, I was 4 years old when you guys formed in 1997, and I wouldn't have heard about it unless I being a Linkin Park fan, and reading about it on Wikipedia or something like that. So to hear people get the light of day, I think it brings a side of the famous singer that we come to know and love, and also great musical talent from all of you as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We're very proud of what we've done, and I think Chester would love what we eventually came to with the music. And it's just another thing that adds to his incredible legacy. He did some amazing stuff with a lot of different musicians. I'm very proud and very biased to everything we did in Grade Ace, but I'm also very proud of what he did in Linkin Park, what he did at Stone Temple Pilots, what he did by Dead by Sunrise, and all of the other little side projects that we played in and that he played in throughout his life. To try to compartmentalize liking what he did in one aspect of his life, I don't think is very fair. I think you have to look at his body of work, and if you're a fan of Chester, you can like all of the groups in different ways. So to me, I was a fan of Chester when I was playing with him. I was a fan of Chester when I wasn't playing with him. I was supportive in every aspect of what he did, but that's because we are friends. And that's what you do as a friend. You support your friends.
That's honestly the slogan that I would say for Amends to be is actually the sound of friendship. That's honestly the way I would describe it. I hear such an essence of unity behind it, and I think that's because at a time this came out in a time where we were all isolated. I think that this was able to kind of give us a unifying aspect and kind of a substitute for the isolation that we were feeling at that time.
Cool. Then we did our job. If you're getting that type of emotional connection to it, then we did our job.
Thank you. I was curious for you as a songwriter, where does your sort of source of inspiration come from? When you were writing material for Amends and writing stuff for Grade Ace, do ideas come out of the blues sometimes, or did you just have to maybe be alone and work in a real strict songwriting structure to make the songs sound the way that they did?
I was eating, living, and breathing it, in the early days for sure. And Chester and I would sit down and write lyrics on our own. We'd write them together. We would bring lyrics in. I'd say, hey, I wrote this song. He'd say, hey, I wrote this song. We both take a look at it. We kind of we worked together in that way. That was really, I think, unique. And I think he and I's working relationship probably lent itself to him and Mike's working relationship later on, because Chester just didn't have that typical singer ego where he couldn't let other people write with him. He was open to anything. If there was a good idea, he was open to trying it. So I think that was a really special thing that Chester had as far as a quality as a writer. Myself, I was a philosophy major in college, and I would tend to write about the subjects that were in front of me at the time. As the grunge era came out of the 80s and our real true musical influences started taking hold, the entire music industry pivoted from talking about sex, drugs, and rock and roll in the 80s to being able to go down the rabbit hole of exploring pain and loneliness and sadness and loss. and talking about those things, and it became okay, and it became standard during that time period to start talking about those things, and we those were the things that we kind of locked onto early on in our careers to write about. And Chester, of course, became very good and very adept at being able to express pain and the way he was feeling and making it okay.
Yeah. Well, you know
So
what?
those were the things I think that were inspirational for us early on.
Yeah, does studying philosophy, because I was an art history major, so philosophy was like something we would talk about on a daily basis and everything. Like, did maybe like learning about philosophy help influence? Because there's a lot of great subject matters you could touch upon, especially with that I think could really relate to what Chester would sing about. Did you maybe sometimes have something to bring to the table for him to incorporate lyrically?
All the time, yeah, all the time. I understood reason, logic, and in music, you get to not always have to go down reason and logic path. You can creatively invent things that don't make sense, but in the song, it may be able to make sense contextually, but the words itself may not actually make sense. But you can bring out something through that I don't think is necessarily something that exists in the philosophical real world where you're talking about reason and logic. So yeah, we played with that a little bit, and love was always a big component of the things we wrote about, and how to really dissect the different qualities and attributes of love, and ways to love, and how to be loved, and things like that. I think found their ways into our music quite a bit.
Yeah. Well, what I think is so great about philosophy is that you take something that is metaphysical and you kind of are able to utilize these ideologies and bring them into like a physical form, in your case music. And I think that's one of the greatest things about philosophy is that it takes an idea and brings it into a way that we apply in our daily lives.
Yeah, you're able to manifest it in maybe a different format, and I think that's what music is really. You're able to manifest things from your experience and put it in a context that others can maybe reinterpret
Yeah.
in their own way.
And
So
and you know what's funny is what kind of mentioning like what Chester was doing. What I loved about all of Chester's projects is, and I mean this as a compliment, but when you were telling me what you were doing with Grey Days, like what the thought process was, and even the stuff with Linkin Park, imagine you're just presenting that to somebody who's never heard anything before. On paper, it may not sound like a good idea, like Hybrid Theory combining heavy metal, rock, and hip hop together, and now like if there was an album that the metalheads and the rap fans in high school could listen to, we always gravitate towards that. So I've always said that like you were able to kind of take ideas that nobody thought of, and people may be taken aback by it, and then all of a sudden make it resonate.
yeah, well, and the guys in Lincoln Park did something really special when they formed the group, and where they were able to put those elements that traditionally didn't necessarily fit together. You had bands like Body Count that were trying to do this rap and rock thing, and as much as I respect Ice-T, that just wasn't my cup of tea. You had bands like Mordred that were in the late '80s, early '90s that kind of did this weird rap fusion with rock that just didn't really work all that well. But then they figured out the recipe to make it work in a way that sounded organically right. It didn't feel like you were sewing two pieces of different fabric together. They made it seem like it was one quilt, so to speak. And I think that's where their creation was really unique in that way.
Yeah. Well, I remember when Hybrid Theory came out, barely, but like I remember when it came out, and like at the time, like the biggest bands were like Third Eye Blind, Everclear, Sugar Ray, Smashing Pumpkins, like that alternative rock and stuff. So I think this was just able to take the best of every genre and kind of bring it to the forefront and be a lot of people's gateway drugs into either heavier material or lighter material. And what I think is so great about Amends is really going back to that is how consistent it is. I feel like people who loved the Syndrome could appreciate a song like She Shines or Shouting Out or B12. You know what I mean? I can't picture somebody having a favorite song on Amends.
Oh, well, thank you. I think the consistency really comes from Chester. If there's one thing that is the common thread through the whole record, is just his emotional honesty is there in every single song. He believes every single word. It's one of the things I love about him as a singer. Is he's just that ability to dig deep and give you that emotional integrity every time he writes.
Well, don't sell yourself short, because I've said it in my review that if this was an instrumental album, and not to discredit Chester by any way, shape, or form, but like I feel like if this was an instrumental album, it would convey just as much emotion and just as much atmosphere. So I was really just impressed by the instrumentation as I did when I heard Chester's voice for the first time. So excellent work to you.
Oh, well, thank you. Look, we're all good musicians. So that's not, I don't mean it in a self-deprecating way, but at the end of the day, we did this for one reason. The reason was to honor our friend. So it's always fun to talk about my friend in that way and make it about him so that it doesn't come across as arrogant or egotistical in our side of things. And it just makes it easy because we get to talk about our buddy and we miss him. And that's really just the context we put it in when we're talking about the music. So, but yeah, we're very proud of our parts and how we wrote this together and all the instrumentation that came along with it and the musical knowledge that we brought to the table. Yes, we're very proud of that aspect too. But first and foremost, it's about our friend.
Yeah, and that's a great way to honor it. I think it gave the fans what they wanted. I think it gave Chester what he would want and his family what he would want. I think really this was the best way to honor a friend and a hero.
Thanks. I really appreciate those comments.
Thank you. And the final question I wanted to ask you is, and I mentioned this with Kristen's, and just please promise me this, because, life is unpredictable, in case we couldn't tell the last year, but, like, do you think, promise me that you will all continue to still play and make music together, even if it's not a Grey Daze thing, but, like, don't let, don't give up the talent, like, keep making music and stuff. I think there's really something
I don't think you can. I don't think you can do that. I've tried to quit music several times and it always creeps back in. Once you're a songwriter, you're a forever songwriter. Maybe you don't do it at the same level or the same frequency that you were doing it before, but it's always a part of you. So I still play. Both my sons play drums. So I don't think I'm going to just stop playing music. I'll probably be, guesting on other people's records and stuff like that throughout. And if we may decide to continue the Grey Daze legacy after we get through all the music, we have at least one more record to do with Chester. So that'll be coming out maybe mid to late this year. We go back in the studio in April, but right now we're focused on the EP that's coming out tomorrow. And we're in it to win it. We're going to be musicians, I think, until we die, and that's just. I know I can speak for Mason Kristen. They still write regardless.
Yeah, it's in your blood. You can't escape it. It's part of who you are, and it's like famous saying, "I didn't choose the music life chose me."
Yeah, once it gets its hooks in you, it's just there. So
yeah. So before we go, I want to thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed chatting with you, and thank you for telling me all these stories as somebody who grew up listening to Chester pretty much my entire life. Is there just anything else with the release of this EP that maybe you would like to promote? I believe there's like an online listening party or something like that.
Yeah, I think I got to hop online in about an hour and join in with the fans. We did this we hired this really cool visual artist that she basically did this beautiful sand art throughout the whole record. So we're going to, at 2:00, so it's 1:00 my time. So in an hour from now, you're going to see literally from the beginning to the end of the record, a whole story play out visually along with the music. And I think she did a beautiful job. So very excited about that.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to checking it out. But thank you so much, Sean. Everybody, we are here with Sean of Grey Daze. Be sure to check out the Amends EP. This is Alex from Heavy New York. We will see you next time.